12 o'clock, we're going to do the minute silence today, so that's about 10 minutes in. So, yeah, we'll just do that. I'll sort of wait for a minute and then we'll carry on after that. So, yeah, that's good. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Justin Jones, who works for National Health. I'll let him do a bit of an intro to himself as well, but he's going to talk around sleep. So, it's going to clap.
Thanks, Rick. It's great to be invited and good to talk to so many fitness professionals. It's where I started when I was at university, kind of working in a gym, and it's still where my passion predominantly lies. Just as a quick introduction, so you can get an idea of who you're talking to. I currently work for Nuffield Health. I have done for the last 5 years. It was actually my first job at university. I started as a health and wellbeing physiologist. So hopefully the majority of you are aware that we have a health screening division. My current role is to act as our National Physiology Manager and Deputy Head of Clinical Wellbeing. So that predominantly involves managing the strategic and tactical development of the physiology division, but to also act as kind of key clinical account manager to a lot of our corporate clients and sites as well. And sleep is something that is coming up more and more often. Unfortunately, in your programme, I seem to be ridiculously tanned. I'm ridiculously tanned today. It's not a look I'm going for. Programme was just after Barcelona, and I was lucky enough to be at Wimbledon on the hottest day of the decade, so this isn't a thing. You know, it just happens to be a tan. So I suppose the main thing to consider is what's changed about sleep. Our sleep patterns have changed significantly over the last 100 years, and even more so in the last 20 years alone. You can see that we're sleeping far less than we were, and there are multiple reasons for that. The main reason being electricity. As soon as electricity was invented, all of a sudden we had a change in our sleep patterns. You no longer had to go to sleep when it got dark. And the problem is that didn't only change our sleep patterns, it also changed our sleep health, which is something we're going to come on to talk about, because not all sleep is equal. There's a big difference between getting 5 or 6 hours of good solid sleep and 9 or 10 hours of kind of intermittent dirty sleep, as Liam, I believe, put it a second ago. This slide doesn't show, although the stats show the last 100 years or so, this slide actually just shows since 1985, so the year before I was born. And what we've seen actually is a boom in things like mobile technology. Okay, so how many of you here kind of use an iPad or an iPhone or something like that in bed? Yeah, surfing social media, watching YouTube. I must admit, I'm guilty of it myself, listening to things like Infinite Monkey Cage, Brian Cox's kind of podcasts and stuff. Just going to sleep because it's a habit I've fallen into. And I still maintain it helps me get to sleep. But does it help me maintain good quality sleep? That's a different thing that we need to consider. So the two main mechanisms that help us fall to sleep, one is sleep homeostasis. So you'll be well familiar with this term, homeostasis. Keeping a balance. The body likes to keep balance. And when we get out of sync, things go wrong. Now you will be telling your clients day in, day out, I'm sure, that physiologically we've hardly changed in the last few thousand years. You know, if you think that we've been on the planet for about 200,000 years, genetically we're still very similar to our great grandfathers, grandmothers, or whatever. We should be sleeping the same amount of them. The fact that we're not, and trying to get by, causes this homeostasis to get out of sync. And the main thing that drives homeostasis is this thing, adenosine. So adenosine is a molecule that helps to promote sleep urge and helps to really drive our need for sleep. It tends to peak at multiple times throughout the day, but specifically peaking at about 2 or 3 o'clock. So the Spanish have got it absolutely right when they go for a little siesta. What do your clients do at 2 or 3 o'clock? They reach for a coffee. Now I'm going to come on to why that's important later. And circadian rhythms. So hopefully you've kind of heard of this term. Circadian rhythm is the body's natural peak and trough in hormonal levels. They can occur kind of morning and night. They can occur at different peaks throughout the hours, or they can occur under different situations. The problem is, again, that regulation of hormonal control has completely disappeared, and hopefully we're going to talk about that as well. Predominantly controlled by something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is essentially stimulated by light and dark environments. So this slide here just shows us what happens to our sleep need to reach homeostasis. So it's obviously dropping as we're asleep, hits rock bottom, let's say 5 or 6 in the morning, and then slowly starts to rise until we sleep again. So that's our need for sleep. Our urge for sleep is slightly different, and that's the thing that's driven by adenosine. And you can see it does peak and trough, going through a midday peak at about 2 or 3. So that's the time at kind of mid-afternoon when your head's going to start kind of going like this. What you need to do then, because our society doesn't really promote us going to take a power nap, is actually find a way to combat that. And that's what we're going to look at later when we look at factors that influence sleep. So that's sleep sleep homeostasis, and then your circadian rhythms. So as you can see, light is a stimulator, not just through the eye, but actually on skin itself. So has anyone seen like Luminex alarm clocks? Those ones that get brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter? They stimulate the suprachiasmatic nucleus by hitting your skin. So for those of you who kind of wake up on a morning like this morning, maybe wake up slightly earlier than you normally do, compared to December or so. Or wake up on a Saturday at 6 AM or something, the birds tweeting, the sun coming through the windows, you wake up with a spring in your step, wanting a healthy breakfast, having good intentions for the day. You wake up at that same time, but on a Monday morning, on a cold, rainy December, when your alarm's shouting in your ear, you wake up with completely different thoughts and completely different processes that you occur throughout the day to actually help you overcome that change in your behaviour. So you're more likely to reach for a croissant at the train station. You're more likely to drive straight to the front door rather than park a little bit further away and kind of take those extra few steps to increase physical activity. So we have this hormone cortisol. Hopefully you've all heard of this. We often refer to it as a stress hormone. Like all things, it's actually a good thing if it's working properly. Without cortisol, your life would be at immediate risk. So we need cortisol. I don't want us to think of it as something that's always being bad. And this would be a typical cortisol rhythm throughout the day. So you can see again, there are peaks and troughs typically associated with when you're intaking food. And those peaks and troughs will change depending on the quality of that food, whether it's a refined sugar or whether it's more of a healthy, balanced diet. That's not so much of a concern because what happens when it's normal is that, again, light hits your skin at about 6 AM, for example. Cortisol levels start to rapidly increase. We know cortisol is an energizing hormone, but it also makes you hungry. So if we think historically, that rapid increase could be explained by your kind of Neanderthal ancestors getting up, getting the energy to go out and hunt for food immediately in the morning. So it's a useful thing, historically. The peaks and troughs then occur, and at the end of the night, it should be lower than it was at the start, because you need less energy. What happens when we get lots of little stresses throughout the day, because remember, this is our stress hormone, you end up with something like this, resulting in cortisol that's too high in the evening. So your adrenal glands, which kind of stimulate this, your adrenal glands end up with slight fatigue. Has anyone heard that term, adrenal fatigue? Yeah. So how it works is you have something called the HPA axis, okay? Which basically means that your hypothalamus responds to a stimulus. That stimulates the release of corticotropin-releasing hormone, which then stimulates the pituitary gland to stimulate adrenocorticotropic-releasing hormone. You may have seen those referred to as CRH and ACTH. The pituitary then stimulates the adrenal cortex to increase cortisol. Now, if that process is happening all the time, your adrenal glands become fatigued. And there's a couple of different postulated theories out there, but one theory, is that us for the...
You got a minute.
Okay. I'll just finish this slide then. But one theory is that actually you end up with a plateau, and you end up with some kind of resistance to this cortisol. And then you end up with the cortisol being too low. And when your cortisol is too low, you end up obviously not having energy and being lethargic, but not even wanting to eat. So just to wrap this up before we end on this slide, this means your clients here with cortisol dysfunction that's too high at night are going to be wired but tired. They need to go to bed, but they're eating refined carbohydrates, they're doing nice, that kind of thing. The ones at the bottom, they're going to be the ones who skip breakfast, feel lethargic in the morning even though they've had 10 hours sleep, and are reaching for their teas and coffees. Just hopefully you can recognise your clients. We'll pick it up after the minute silence. So as we've mentioned here then, you end up with clients that are feeling like they're not wanting breakfast, even though they've been asleep for 8 to 10 hours in the morning, reaching for the coffees and stimulants. That then perpetuates a vicious cycle. Because what do we know coffee is going to do? Well, it's going to increase cortisol. It's a strong stimulant, a stress hormone. So you end up with this spike. And then we end up with a massive insulin rush. So it drops again. But as we know with something like a strong coffee, that may end up not causing an appropriate response of insulin, but actually an excessive response of insulin. So what happens to stop you going into a hypoglycemic coma? You get more cortisol. And up and down and up and down and up and down. And this is where the cortisol dysfunction and adrenal fatigue occurs. By the way, these little stresses can be anything. They can be emails, telephone calls, bank statements. They never actually tend to require these days cortisol at all. And remember, cortisol is a good thing, because when we're stressed, it's normally because something's trying to kill us. So we run away. And we need cortisol to do all of the stimulatory effects it's going to do. But if we're sat at our desk, not so good. And certainly not so good for your clients, because what does it do? It promotes visceral fat storage around the abdominal region as well, central obesity. Okay, so brainwaves and sleep. There are 4 distinct brainwaves, and they vary slightly depending on which stage of sleep you're in. So your beta waves are going to be those in conscious activity. Alpha waves, relaxed and daydreaming. Theta waves are snoozing, and delta waves are sleeping. Because there are different stages of sleep, as I mentioned earlier, not all the same. And there's certain sleep architecture that we're supposed to go through to actually get the hormonal response and regulation that we need. The only thing that varies from these is the kind of frequency of the waves. We also have at the bottom REM. Has anyone heard of that? Yes, there's your rapid eye movement sleep, predominantly where we do most of our dreaming, not all of it. There is some research that suggests that we do some dreaming in non-rapid eye movement sleep, but certainly your vivid dreams are going to be in your rapid eye movement sleep. So the drowsiness and transition between awaking and falling asleep with your alpha and your theta waves, that's going to be the kind of thing where you're watching a film. You know, where it's getting a bit late, but maybe it's Sunday evening, put Lord of the Rings marathon on or something like that, and then Frodo's just getting up Mount Doom and your head's going off. That's when you're in that kind of dozy response. You're definitely awake, but actually you keep slipping in and out of awake and kind of daydreaming, if you like. You might get it, hopefully not in this particular discussion, but you might get it when you're at university. You know, when you just kind of zoned out and someone's talking to you and they say, so what happened there? You're like, I have no idea. Or, hasten to add, I'm guilty of it myself, when I'm driving home. Put a cruise control on, so I don't even have to do anything. And also I've got home, I can't remember how I got there. Okay, it's these kind of things where we're awake, we're conscious, but we're not fully present. The period of light sleep, that's where you are asleep, but someone mentioned your name, you can respond. Normally when you fall asleep with a load of your mates in the room, because you're conscious and you recognise they might shave your eyebrows off or something like that. Okay, so you're asleep, but you're partially alert. Stage 3 and 4 is what we call slow wave sleep. You often see it referred to as SWS in the research. And that's your deep sleep. That's where your delta waves take control. And that's predominantly focusing on the first period of sleep, where we tend to see significant increases in things like slow wave sleep. Rapid eye movement sleep, active period of sleep characterized by intense brain activity. So actually rapid eye movement sleep typically kind of from a neurophysiology perspective actually reflects you being awake. So this is when you're doing your vivid dreaming. And what happens when you're dreaming is your body goes through a part of temporal paralysis. So your large muscle groups actually become disabled, if you like. So actually you're very, very much awake, but your body won't move. You also lose the ability to regulate the amount of temperature, or your core temperature control during this period of sleep. And actually, in terms of why we have this sleep, it's up in the air. Some people believe it's because that's when certain hormones are not being pumped out. So things like your histamines, for example, are not being released, and actually it's a natural reduction in activity in those areas, allowing those glands that secrete these hormones to actually recover. Some people did postulate that it's actually down to building memory, so actually laying down short-term memories in the hippocampus. But actually it's been postulated now that slow wave sleep does the same. So there's a lot of conflicting research around REM sleep. Most of the research is focusing on non-REM sleep at the moment. It's interesting to note that we are not the only mammals that sleep. And actually the amount of REM sleep that people go through is predominantly dependent on their dependency when they're infants. So actually dolphins don't have REM sleep very much, and as soon as they're born they're able to kind of fend for themselves and that kind of stuff. Whereas animals who are more infantile when they're born and more reliant on others tend to need more REM sleep. So at the moment researchers are trying to look into exactly why that is the case. So sleep architecture. Average sleep ideally about 7 to 9 hours per night. You can kind of question yourselves whether you get this or your clients do. We need the right mix of sleep phases, and it's just as important as the sleep quantity. So I'm going to show you that in a second. We complete sleep cycles consisting of REM and non-REM sleep throughout the night. Each cycle lasts around an hour and a half, and then we end up with somewhere between 4 and 7 cycles per night predominantly, depending on how long the cycle had lasted. What happens throughout the night is that REM sleep gets more, not dominant, because slow wave sleep should be normally dominant, but longer in duration. So in the first half of sleep you might end up with just 10 minutes or so per REM stage, whereas actually towards the end of the night you end up with say 30 minutes or so per REM stage. So you tend to do more dreaming in the latter stages of sleep. And what they believe is whether you remember a dream or not will actually depend on what stage of sleep you're in when you wake up. Another postulated mechanism actually, not mechanism, but reason why we dream, and we have this rapid eye movement sleep, which remember, is basically like being awake but being paralysed. So you guys would all experience those dreams where actually you feel like you were there, and sometimes you have to wake up and almost question about 3 or 4 times what's real. It's a bit like Inception, the world's gone mad kind of thing. Sometimes it's a disappointment when you find out it's a dream, sometimes it's you're kind of wiping the sweat off your brow. And actually, part of the reason why they think that we do actually dream and have this REM sleep is actually when you wake up from REM sleep, you're more alert. So when you're dreaming and someone wakes you up and you're straight up, you hear a noise at night or whatever it is. Whereas actually when you're in slow wave sleep, that's when you're more likely to wake up and feel quite kind of dozy and take a little bit longer to switch on. So they think it could be a historical defense mechanism. Because if we're in that slow wave sleep all the time, we're very susceptible to being attacked during sleep. So we can see that about 50% of time is spent in phase 2 and about 20% in REM sleep. Phase 2 is the one where we enter REM sleep. So you tend not to go from stage 3 or 4 into REM. It tends to be, well, I'll show you what architecture looks like on the next slide. So you tend to be awake, you would then drop into non-REM stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. And remember, all they're reflecting is different brainwave lengths. Yeah, alphas, thetas, deltas, betas. So you've got shallow sleep, deep sleep. What you generally tend to do is go from awake to 1, 2, 3, 4, back to 3, back to 2, into REM for 10 minutes or so. Back into 2, back into 3, back into 4. Back into 3, back into 2, back into REM. But then it might be a little bit longer, 15 or so. And you keep repeating that for about 5 or 6 cycles throughout the night. So that's what good sleep architecture looks like. What does that look like in reality? A little something like this. Anyone got a Microsoft band? One person? I was fortunate, I worked with Microsoft as a clinical advisor during their press releases. So I was fortunate to get my hands on one, and it tracks my sleep. So some of them will use just accelerometers to track sleep. Remember, we've already discussed how that works. Because when you're in REM sleep, you go through that partial paralysis, you don't move. If you're not moving at all during sleep, it's a suggestion that you're in REM sleep, so it gives it a good indication or ballpark figure of what type of sleep you'd like to be in. But they also track your heart rate as well. Your heart rate would gradually drop as you sleep, as your core body temperature drops. So what we can see is my stats on the left-hand side. So I've slept for 6 hours, 21 minutes. I had about 3 hours of restful sleep. It's actually a slow wave sleep. About the same of non-restful sleep or light sleep, your stage 1 and stage 2. I woke up once Time to fall asleep was 4 minutes, and had a resting heart rate of around 47 beats per minute. So what we can see at the top actually is those blocks shown. The dark purple blocks are the ones that are associated with me being in a deeper stage. And what did we say earlier? Someone's yawning up there because we're talking about sleep. So what did we say earlier? Was that actually the non-REM sleep, your deeper slow wave sleep, particularly 3 and 4, they're the ones which are your restful sleep. So the purple blocks represent that. We also mentioned that actually the latter stages is when REM becomes more dominant, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. 90-minute cycles of blocks, so that would be good sleep architecture. I woke up that morning feeling refreshed. What we can see from my heart rate is interesting, is that actually, yes, it drops, average up here of about 60, coming down to, about 40 odd, it tells me. But actually there are spikes. The idea is what these spikes represent.
Changes into different levels.
It's a good guess. No, kind of, but not quite. What they represent is actually, I'm a nightmare as a bedtime partner in that I snore. Okay? So this is me snoring. That snoring is representing not enough air sufficiently escaping my body. So I'm not getting rid of CO2 quick enough. I'm not taking in oxygen enough. So what happens to keep tissue perfusion the same is that your heart rate increases as a compensatory mechanism. So as a result, I'm getting spikes here where I'm kind of snoring. And for those of you who have boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives who do snore, you might find that at times they just stop breathing altogether. And you're like, are they still awake? Are they alive even? And then all of a sudden you'll get that big breath. Obviously they're asleep, but their heart rate's having to increase, isn't it? Because otherwise they're going to end up with that low tissue perfusion. The problem we've got, and I'm going to talk about it later anyway, but I may as well talk about it now, is that unless you're going to lose blood during sleep, anytime your heart rate increases, what happens? Blood pressure increases. Okay? So if your heart rate is increasing, the rate at which you're pushing a volume, a known quantity of fluid around the system, blood pressure has to increase as a result. Now, I think we're all very, very guilty, potentially in the physiology world, potentially in the kind of health MOT world, of measuring someone's blood pressure and going, wow, your blood pressure is 120 over 80. Or you might even say, your blood pressure is 155 over 95. Remember, that's a one-off measurement. Actually, what we're mainly interested in is the 24-hour average. So, one thing we know is that your resting blood pressure is relatively hypotensive because your heart rate's dropping. Remember, heart rate drops. If you've got the same volume of blood in your body, blood pressure drops as well, just natural laws of physics. So, if you sleep for 8 hours a night, for example, you will get that relative lower blood pressure, okay, because no matter how low it goes, it will always go lower than your normal is. So if you've got a blood pressure of 170 over 100, even if it goes down to 150 over 90, which is still not ideal, it's still lower than whatever it is when you're awake. So if you sleep for 8 hours, that's a third of your day where you're getting this lower blood pressure. If you only sleep for 4 hours, that's a sixth of your day. So remember, sleep influences someone's 24-hour average. Okay, so consider to get your clients to sleep longer. Okay, so what happens when architecture isn't great? We lose the ability to get into non-REM stage 4, that restful stage of sleep. And it's often down to things like caffeine, sugar, stress, alcohol. They all do the same thing. They all stimulate the body. They all influence cortisol production. They all, in a roundabout way, influence things like insulin. Okay, which basically compounds itself to a multitude of factors. Because what does insulin do? That increases central obesity. What does central obesity do? Well, it's probably likely to increase your likelihood that you might snore. What will that do? Well, it's going to increase sleep apnea, etc., etc. So it's not just one factor. It's not like it's just a switch, but it's a multitude of factors. What happens there? Well, if you can't get into a non-REM stage 4 sleep, you're actually losing your ability to regulate your own hormones and get cellular repair and activity. So human growth hormone is secreted in waves when you're asleep, predominantly when you're in deep sleep, non-REM stage 3 and 4. So if you're getting clients who want to build muscle and they're not sleeping enough, they're losing out on a hell of a lot of human growth hormone. If they're taking in too many stimulants, too much alcohol, too much caffeine, again, they're losing out on a lot of human growth hormone. And as we all know in here, when you exercise, you never make yourself stronger by exercising. If you go in the gym and kind of someone told me the other day, they have a workout, they call it National Chest Day, and it's every Thursday. Yeah, if you do that, when you leave the gym, if I ask you to do 5 press-ups, if you've done your workout right, you can't do any. You always walk out of the gym weaker than when you walked in. It's recovery that makes you stronger. So a lot of your clients may well be neglecting one of the key aspects of recovery and key ways of boosting and increasing human growth hormone production. So what does that look like? Again, on Microsoft Band, I went out, had a few beers, I came back, and actually I slept a lot longer. So I actually slept for 9 hours and 10 minutes because it was a weekend. However, restful sleep, 1 hour, 1 minute. So a third less restful sleep. Light sleep, majority of the time, I woke up 6 times. Because alcohol does a number of things. One is that when it's starting to be metabolized, its effect will start to wear off. What that then predominantly does is make your body wake up. You often get dehydrated, so you wake up and go to the bathroom, but actually you get the beer sweats. Okay? Alcohol is a diuretic. Diuretics don't just make you urinate, they also make you sweat. Their whole job is to just get rid of water. Okay? Resting blood pressure was a little bit higher. Time to fall asleep wasn't too long, because alcohol is actually a sedative. Okay? Have you heard of GABA? GABA is a neurotransmitter that actually helps us to fall asleep. It works in opposement to glutamine. So glutamine tends to keep us active. GABA inhibits it inhibits, let's say, neural pathways from continuing. So it will inhibit those kind of receptors on the other side of the synaptic cleft. So I went to sleep. I got to sleep nice and quick because GABA was being, let's say, was being facilitated. Alcohol is a GABA agonist. It works with GABA. So it's being facilitated, allowed me to get to sleep nice and quickly. Dominated S-wave, so slow wave sleep in the first half. Fine, no problem at all. That's what we expect to see. However, there's far less of it. During this sleep, I'm less likely to get REM sleep. And there's actually been research to show that although alcohol has been shown to increase slow wave sleep, particularly over the first half of the night, it actually doesn't have that much of an impact in growth hormone. Actually, we can see that the two can become disassociated. So actually, it's not a case of normally where stages 3 and 4 you get an increase in growth hormone. You still get that increase in stage 3 or 4, but without the increase in growth hormone. So what do? Well, you wake up feeling exhausted. You slept for 9 hours, but actually you wake up feeling lethargic. You wake up with, anyone who's trying to play football after a night out, you wake up with kind of legs like lead. So your body just does not recover well enough. And you can see the times that you wake up in the night, those red spikes are waking up in the night, probably to go to the bathroom. So if we compare that to here, where actually there's only a wake at the start, and then a wake at the end, that's probably where I put my alarm on snooze, fell back to sleep, put it on snooze again. Okay? Whereas here, multiple waking up during the end of the night where the effects of alcohol are wearing off, I'm starting to sweat, I'm starting to need to go to the toilet, and waking up feeling lethargic. So the first half of sleep, as we've discussed, is dominated by non-REM sleep, particularly your slow wave sleep, characterised by a high release of human growth hormone. Second half of sleep is dominated by REM sleep, which is characterised by temporary paralysis of limb muscles. Sleep is best 2 to 3 hours after melatonin peaks. So everyone heard of melatonin? Yeah, it's a hormone that's produced by serotonin, and it actually makes us go to sleep, makes us feel drowsy. I'm going to talk about the influence of some lifestyle factors on melatonin when I come on to ways in which we can improve sleep. So sleep and obesity. It's been in the news a lot. Sleep makes you fatter if it's not right, unfortunately. However, it's not so simple. There's a sweet spot of around 8 hours. You might not be able to see it so well there. But what you can actually see is 9 hours is the dotted line with the crossing. So it's actually third up from the bottom. So actually sleeping, it's not a case of the longer you sleep, the lighter your weight. There's actually a sweet spot of around 7 to 8 hours, which is ideal. And that's down to multiple reasons. We're going to go into those in a second. However, I'm just going to put it out there that one reason might just be accidental. in that those who sleep for longer, I mean, how many of you sleep for more than 9 hours? Why? Don't have time. Why don't you still go to work? So those people who actually sleep for more than 9 hours are likely to be unemployed potentially. That's where they've got time to sleep for longer than 9 hours. The rest of us don't have the time. And actually, if you're unemployed, you're more likely to be overweight anyway, because you're more likely to eat poorer quality food, more likely to have reduced accessibility to health services that raise your awareness on the dangers of being overweight, etc. I can't imagine many of you guys have got unemployed clients. So we've got to kind of caveat that and say, well, actually, there could be some socio-demographics going on here as well. But actually, if you don't sleep enough, so right at the top, sleeping for 5 hours or less led to the heaviest weight. What we're going to do now is just kind of look at why that might be. So these are some of the mechanisms that are going to link sleep loss and the opportunity to eat, which is going to lead to an increase in energy density. Okay? So if you're not sleeping as much, you're awake longer. If you're awake longer, you've got more opportunity to take calories in. So that's one very simple mechanism. Another simple mechanism, tired. You don't sleep enough, you're tired. If you're tired, again, more likely to not be spontaneously physically active. Anyone live in London here? Yeah, so I'm a Londoner as well, so what I tend to do when I go to places like City Gym, to see some of our physiologists there, I walk from my house, it's about an hour. If I have a bad night's sleep, I'm more likely to say, do you know what, I can't be bothered, I'm going to get you. So just little things like that. Low leptin. Everyone heard of leptin? Yeah? So leptin is a hormone that tells you when you're full. Okay? So if you've got good levels of leptin, it tells you when you're full. Now leptin is regulated by the amount of fat you have. So actually, it's a feedback mechanism to balance homeostasis, that word again. So actually, if you get fatter, your body will increase leptin levels to say, next time you eat, don't eat so much, because I want you to be back down here. The problem is that when you sleep, leptin levels become dysfunctional. Poor sleep knocks out your body's ability to regulate leptin. Ghrelin, leptin's kind of nemesis, does the opposite. Ghrelin tells you you're hungry. And again, poor sleep means you result in more ghrelin. So how many people after a poor night's sleep has reached for the sugary option at breakfast? Said, oh, do you know, I won't make some porridge, I'll just grab a bacon sandwich at the train station or something like that. Now, thing about leptin, actually, they did some research where they made these rats deficient in leptin. And what they found was that actually the rats who were made deficient in leptin got fatter and did less activity. The rats who actually had leptin functionality, if you like, ended up, even though they were allowed to eat as much as they want, they stopped eating when they felt full. We don't know they felt full, they just stopped. But we assume they stopped eating when they felt full. And they then, after a while, just got on their wheel and started to run. So there are thoughts actually that leptin increases spontaneous physical activity as well. So that desire to just get up, be active. Have you heard of NEAT? Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Okay? So stuff I'm doing now. Rather than sat down, talking to you guys, I'm just get up, I'm fidgeting, I'm moving around. That actually burns most of your calories throughout the day. And actually research is showing that no matter how often you exercise, if you're physically inactive for the rest of the day, you have a very high risk of disease. So even if someone comes to see one of you guys for an hour a day every day, and they do absolutely fantastic, and they have a great workout, if they spend the other 23 hours sat on their arse or asleep, they're going to be at high risk of disease. Okay, there's some really good research by Stephen Blair. Okay, anyone heard the term smoker diabetes? So Stephen Blair did a paper in 1996. I was fortunate enough to hear him speak and to actually discuss some of his theories with him at the Royal Society of Medicine's conference that I went to with Chris Foster a couple of weeks ago. And what his research showed was actually, he looked at something called attributable fractions. So attributable fractions means if you removed this particular thing from the population, what impact would it have? So if you turned non-fit people into fit people, if you turned smokers into non-smokers, obese people into normal weight people, etc., hypertensive people into people with normal blood pressure. What happens is actually, low fitness is the greatest risk factor for all-cause mortality. which is basically a fancy term for dying young. Okay? And he found that the attributable fractions associated with low fitness were 17% and 16% for men and women respectively. Okay? So 17% of all deaths for men were just down to being not fit. Now actually that was more than smoking, diabetes and obesity added together. So look it up, it's called the Aerobic Centre Longitudinal Study. It's done on Harvard alumni. Have you heard of Dr. Mike Evans and his informative videos, 23.5 hours? Okay, definitely look that up, guys. If we get time at the end of this, I might put up, if we've got internet here, I'll put it on YouTube and show you it. Really, really interesting. Nothing to do with sleep, but it's really interesting. And basically, Stephen Blair's work is quoted in that, and it's going on to show people the importance of just being active. Yeah, that crude term. Yeah, it's better off to be fat and fit than fit and unfit. Absolutely true. Okay, other hormones. So we've spoken already about things like cortisol. We've spoken about neurotransmitters like GABA and glutamine and the influence that they can have on sleep. All of this basically means you have poorer food selection, you have reduced energy expenditure, and you're more hungry, which leads to obesity. So all of a sudden, we're seeing that sleep loss can lead to a complex pathway, increasing your risk of obesity. Which basically means your clients are going to come to you and say, your personal trainer's not working. Well, it could be actually, you're doing great sessions there, and they're just not sleeping enough. So we need to consider the things they do outside the gym as well. Okay, so there's a U-shaped association, as we've already discussed, between BMI. And the sweet spot was 7.7 hours of sleep per night led to the healthiest BMI. But you can see those at the shorter end of sleep and longer end of sleep also had weight gain around that point.
Does it matter when in the day you have the sleep?
Yes, because that's going to influence your sleep quality. So shift workers have a massively increased risk of cardiovascular disease, significantly. Unfortunately.
Is this significant to children? Sorry.
Pardon?
Is this significant in young children as well, or this is just
Not young children. It depends how young you're talking, but
preteen?
preteens need more sleep, and teens need more sleep as well. So they need more human growth hormone release.
Right.
So actually, they will naturally sleep longer. They need to. Infants obviously need to sleep as much as they can because again, they need more human growth hormone release. But for general healthy adults, that's what this is predominantly focused on. And what we can see is actually short sleep is associated with low leptin, meaning you don't know when to stop eating, and high ghrelin. Okay. Sleep and glucose regulation. So, again, this graph is just showing that there is a sweet spot, somewhere between 7 and 8 hours, of those people who are sleeping for that length of time end up with reduced incidence of diabetes and reduced risk of impaired glucose tolerance, which is obviously a precursor to diabetes, for many of the reasons we've already discussed, because of the influence it has on cortisol and leptin, how you eat and how active you are, etc., etc. Men reporting more than 8 hours of sleep per night were 3 times as likely to develop diabetes. So actually, it's almost like sleeping more is just as bad, if not worse. But again, we do need to take into consideration socio-economic factors. Potential mechanisms are multifactorial. Glucose production, glucose disposal, glucose infusion rates, and free fatty acids. So essentially what these graphs are showing that actually from baseline and after 3 nights of slow wave sleep suppression, so they're not getting into that deeper stage of sleep, what we can see is that insulin sensitivity dropped. Okay, so they're less likely to actually respond to insulin. What then happens is the body produces more and more insulin because it thinks it's doing you a favour. You become insulin resistant long term, potentially. Okay, we can see that acute glucose response remained largely unchanged. However, less of that glucose was utilised by the tissues themselves, and glucose tolerance reduced. So the body's ability to tolerate glucose. So not good in terms of metabolic risk. And how a lot of this occurs would be down to things like visceral fat storage long term as well. So again, we know that cortisol, which is a significant hormone, is going to promote visceral obesity. That increases lipolysis, increases your risk of cardiovascular disease as well, because you get dyslipidemia. Because actually, if you become insulin resistant for example, which is what's going to happen here long term. Insulin influences something called hormone-sensitive lipase, which is an enzyme that sits inside the cells. And actually, when insulin isn't working properly or you're resistant to insulin, that hormone-sensitive lipase is free to hydrolyze lots and lots of triglycerides into glycerols and free fatty acids. What then happens is those free fatty acids get released back into your bloodstream, and they're formed into very low density lipoproteins, which is what we call bad cholesterol, if you like, or really bad cholesterol if you're going to term LDL bad cholesterol. Those VLDLs are then acted upon by lipoprotein lipase in the bloodstream, which breaks them down, sends the fatty acids from there into the fat cells, and then converts the VLDL, so very low density lipoprotein lipase, into an IDL, so an intermediary density lipoprotein. And then you end up with that IDL being converted into LDL. And obviously we know that LDL has a higher risk of becoming glycosylized. As a result, you're going to get more inflammation within your cardiovascular system and a higher risk cardiovascular disease. Not to mention the fact that your VLDL has just deposited loads of kind of triglyceride substances, if you like, free fatty acids, back into the fat cell, and the vicious cycle is going to continue. That LDL molecule that's just been kind of broken down from VLDL to IDL to LDL is then going to be sent to the liver. Liver's going to act upon it. It's going to take away some of the free fatty acids and again increase that transit back round into the fat cells. Multifactorial risks here, one being that number of fat cells will change in number and in size. Okay, so when you pull on weight, you get more fat cells and they swell. When you lose weight, you just shrink the size of the fat cells, your number stays the same. So you're primed to increase weight. That's why these diets, oh yeah, I ended up losing weight, but then I put more back on. Because you increase fat cells, they swell, you then lose weight, the swollen fat cells will reduce back down to normal size, but the number stays the same. So you've got more capacity to grow fat. That's why free fatty acids might be a potential mechanism there. Hypertension. We've already discussed this. So actually, the longer you sleep, the better it is for your 24-hour average. We can see that with each hour of reduction in sleep duration associated with a 37% increase in the risk of developing hypertension. And then actually those in the lowest group, these two bullet points basically say the same thing in a slightly different way. Those in the lowest group essentially who had less than 4% of their sleep in that deep stage of sleep, so maybe me when I had a couple of drinks of beer, end up with an 80% increased risk of developing hypertension. So again, consider sleep quality as well, not just the quantity. How much of your sleep was in deep restorative sleep. I appreciate there's a lot to digest, by the way, on the graphs here. So if anyone wants these studies, I can kind of send them out, no problem at all. But essentially the graphs are just showing that kind of 5-year change in systolic and diastolic blood pressure associated with poorer sleep. Sleep maintenance is basically your ability to stay in good sleep, good health sleep. All-cause mortality, we've spoken about this term already. So we can see again this sweet spot around 7 hours or so. 7.7 was reported for BMI, but 7 to 8 hours, we can see that's when your risk of all-cause mortality is at its lowest, and that actually the hazard ratio, so basically your relative risk compared to the ideal, increases either side, whether it's sleeping too much or not sleeping enough. And again, the reasons for that are multifactorial. Could be risk of diabetes. If there's one disease you don't want to get, it's diabetes. You get cardiovascular disease, you die of a heart attack. You get cancer, you die of cancer. You get diabetes, you're likely to die of all of those things, because it significantly increases your risk. Type 2 diabetes lowers your lifespan by somewhere between 7 and 10 years. So no one kind of, when they're a kid, you get a tooth and you put it in a glass of Coke, it's disintegrated by the morning. That's what glucose does. It damages live tissues. It's an irritant. So if you imagine kind of scratching your skin for a short period of time, no problem. You get a short inflammatory response, fine. But actually, if you do that for ages and ages and ages, all of a sudden, you end up with a very, very damaged tissue. And that's basically how cardiovascular disease occurs. It's not an active state, it's not an inactive state. It's actually a very active state that occurs over a short period, a long period of time. So I often compare it to like a wedding. Okay? We've all been at a wedding, maybe when you're 10 years old, and you're running, maybe some of your uncles if they're a bit older and had a few to drink, and you're running, you slide on your knees, and you fly across that dance floor because someone's just polished that dance floor for you. Okay? That's like blood cholesterol. It is designed to move through your cardiovascular system, no problem at all. It's only when you get some form of inflammation, so imagine trying to do it on a carpet rather than the dance floor, okay, where you don't go anywhere, and you just stick and you cause more damage. Glycosylated LDL, okay, so that LDL cholesterol that's been acted upon by high sugar levels, maybe you can throw into other irritants, smoking, high blood pressure. That's what causes an increased risk of atherosclerosis. It's not a case that cholesterol particles just stick to your blood wall and then just build up. It's a migration of them into the tunica intima because they're glycosylated, and the inflammatory responses and processes that occur following that, things like C-reactive protein, the interleukin families, potentially, that come to actually mediate that inflammatory response. So there are multiple reasons why that might be the case. Okay, so fighting against natural circadian rhythms leads to diminished physical and mental performance, as someone mentioned earlier about shift workers. You could argue is that part of the reason, potentially, why shift workers get paid more money to work night shifts? One might be inconvenience, another might be, well, the research is saying it's not going to be good for your health. We need to compensate these people.
Is that over a long period